Climbing Marvel Rivals has never been harder, and with many of the changes that came in Season 2 and that will come in the mid-season patch, you need the 8 unwritten rules that will help you climb as quickly as possible. And I've been helping more and more players climb to the highest elos of play, so we're gonna break everything down that you need to climb super quickly for every single role. But for 30 days of free coaching, coach scrims, and consistent help and guidance, check out the Marvel Rivals Academy. Details will be in the links down below, but let's waste no more time and jump in. Now, the first unwritten rule is learning your matchups. And in order to even know what your matchups in, what characters are your favored against or unfavored against, you need to know the 3 primary compositions in Marvel Rivals. There is Brawl, there is Poke, and there is Dive. Now, there's a lot to say about each of these 3, but let me simplify it for you really quickly. First off, Brawl is a close range composition, characters that really want to get in close because they have close effective range, but they're extremely lethal from that close range. So you could think of characters like Mr. Fantastic or characters like Groot as characters that would fit along in a brawl. And oftentimes you don't want to hold open space. Oftentimes you want to kill the entire enemy team before you capture objectives or put them in a situation where they have to fight you from close range. And as long as you can set up these optimal close range engagements, you will consistently win fights. Now for Poke, this is more long distance damage. You're typically trying to trade damage from range. Characters like Magneto fit extremely well in a Poke composition. Other characters could be characters like Storm, Adam Warlock, Hela. These are all Poke characters that play extremely well from range, can get value from the furthest distances, and are constantly providing pressure even if you're not right up to an enemy. Now it's important because this composition is very lacking when it comes to fighting in close. If enemies get to close in the gaps on you, you become a lot less effective, so you typically need to constantly play at a range and play at a distance until you get enough of an advantage before you push in on like a brawl comp, for example. So the brawl comp constantly wants to use terrain and routing to getting close to the Poke, and the Poke comp wants to constantly give up space and maintain their range until they get that advantage, and then they can eventually go in and close out the fight. But not until that advantage is gotten, because you are going to be playing right into the effective range of your opponent. So let's take a very straight line example of this. Let's take Thing versus Mag. Does the Mag want to push into the Thing? No, he doesn't. The Mag wants to constantly maintain his distance, and if he is poking the Thing or other people, he wants to do it from a range that the Thing cannot engage onto him unless the Thing is going to burst his cooldowns. Now, ideally, at some point, because you're playing these ranges, you will create an advantage because brawl characters are not effective unless they're close, while you're still effective from the further ranges. Once you have that advantage, we can close in, and that's how the fight and the matchup plays out. But there's still a third type of composition that you need to understand, and that's Dive. This type of composition is defined by hypermobility. So you are a person that wants to go in and surgically attack specific things, whether it's isolated DPS or it's isolated supports, and you're using your mobility to dive onto these people, go at them directly, and you're surgically killing them, baiting their cooldowns, or trying to make a play on them. Now, in general, Dive is going to be more favored against Poke than Brawl, and the reason is because the characters that are played in Poke oftentimes have to take isolated angles or try to take angles at all in order to deal damage to the enemy team. But a Dive composition is able to target and pick apart certain of these characters. If it's a Hela off-angling or someone playing by themselves, the Dive can target these players using their mobility and punish them for being alone or spread. And if a Poke composition plays extremely close together, to mitigate this, they are playing in a sort of brawl formation, but without the tools that a normal brawl composition would have. Now, it's not so easy to say it's rock, paper, scissors, though, because actually Dive can still be played against Brawl, and Brawl can still be played against Poke, and all these compositions can still work. You just have to find ways to minimize their best engagements and still find ways to get value. Like, as an example, if you're a Dive comp and they're playing Brawl, there are going to be times where the Brawl tanks or the Brawl frontline is pushed forward trying to make a play, and their backline supports that don't have brawling capabilities are isolated, and that still can be a target that you capitalize on. And of course, there's other hybrid compositions that make this really more complicated than it seems. But basically, I want you to understand these core types of compositions. Think about how your character fits in with what your tanks are trying to do, because they are the building blocks for every composition. If you see a certain tank, like a Captain America, you're definitely not playing Brawl, you're definitely not playing Poke. If you're seeing something like a Thing, you pretty much have to be playing Brawl or maybe Dive. So by looking at what the composition's trying to do, you can pick characters that fit into the strategy of the comp better, and by going with the grain instead of against the grain, in trying to double down on the same play patterns and strategies that your team is trying to incorporate, you will get more value than if you're trying to do something all by yourself. For example, if you're playing Black Panther in an all mobility dive composition where you have a Venom, a Cap going in, baiting cooldowns, it makes your job way easier. But if you're trying to play Black Panther when your whole team is playing Poke, Magneto, Doctor Strange, Hawkeye, Adam Warlock, and you're just trying to dive, you have nothing to bait out these cooldowns. No one is closing in the gap. They don't want to close in the gap until they get an advantage. So you're just going to have to get isolated picks without any help, or you're not going to do anything until your team gets a pick without you, which is also just really inefficient. Then the second unwritten rule in Marvel Rivals is about ability advantage. Creating it equals winning fights. So not everything is just about a kill. I think a lot of people get over obsessed with final blows and kills, but there are a lot of important stages in a fight that you need to do first if you want to have consistently favored engagements and you want to win fights and win team fights, most importantly, capture objectives. So what does this actually mean? This means that you're not always going to be able to just run down and insta-kill the backline, run it down, get 2 taps on the enemy DPS, instantly destroy their front line. You're not going to be able to always do that because there's so many powerful cooldowns and they dictate how an entire fight is played. And if you can understand which of these cooldowns are actually important, then it can change everything about how you're playing. So let me give you this example. Let's say that you're playing Venom and you dive into the enemy backline and they have a Loki and they have a Luna and then they also have a Magneto, right? And so you go in and you dive and engage, and the Luna uses freeze on you, and then the Loki pops his totems and the Magneto bubbles one of them and you zip out, right? You leave, you don't die, you zip out. Now, this was an extremely favorable engagement for you. You died, but you baited out 3 incredibly powerful cooldowns. That means that when you re-engage, those cooldowns don't exist. And the reason I say that is because most of the time people think, oh, I only made a mistake when I die. But in reality, they all made a mistake. A lot of them made a mistake, multiple mistakes, and no one died. But if you look at that clip and you see the wasted cooldowns and you see the fact that they got no kills, they didn't kill the Venom cycled out and he gets to cycle back in soon, you could make a very accurate prediction and say, yeah, they're gonna get completely destroyed this next engagement cycle. Completely demolished. And that almost happens 100% of the time, where now the Venom goes in with whoever else and there's no totem and there's no freeze and there's no bubble and everyone dies. And this is super important because the better you get at Marvel Rivals, the more attuned you get with tracking these things. Not only on the offensive side, which is I'm going to play not to get kills necessarily, but to bait these cooldowns, and I'm going to dive as Venom or I'm gonna dive as Cap with the intent to bait out totem. I'm not going to overextend. I'm not going to go really hard. I'm not even going to really try to kill him. I'm going in the second the cooldown is baited. I'm not staying longer. I'm dipping out instantly because that's the objective. Cooldown, good, out. Because I'm going to go back in when they don't have the cooldown. But what this also means on the defensive side is that if you're playing as, you know, Loki, or if you're playing as anyone, Bucky, anyone on your team, and you see important cooldowns being used, your Adam popped his soul bond, your Luna popped their freeze, your Magneto wasted his bubble, you understand that y'all are very vulnerable in this moment. There's a window of time until these cooldowns come back that your team is very vulnerable. And there are things that you can do to make it so that you can still sustain the dive, right? You can conserve your cooldowns. You can position more defensively. You could be ready to try to make a counterplay on the divers because you know that there's going to be a window where they're going to come in. And if they don't come in during that window and you get your cooldowns back, then you're good. But recognizing that once the cooldowns are wasted, your team is weaker. And once opponents' cooldowns are wasted, they're weaker. And understanding that that is a neutral state where no one has died, but some teams have massive advantages, and it basically tells you what is going to happen. It can give you a very strong prediction about the steps that are going to happen in the immediate next 5 to 10 seconds, and that can help you make a better game plan. Now, you could also learn really quickly when things are going wrong. So let's say you go in as a team, y'all all are jumping in, and you know, your Emma popped her diamond form, your Magneto popped his bubble, your freaking Psylocke went in Viz, and you use Soul Bond, and everyone's running in, right? Everyone's running in. And the fight goes on for 5, 10, 12 seconds, and no one on the enemy team has died. So your whole team made a play, your whole team pushed in, y'all are in a fight, y'all popped a ton of cooldowns, and no one's dead. At a certain point in time, you recognize no one died on our team. we're still 6v6, but if this fight keeps going, and we didn't get anything with those abilities, we didn't get any value, we didn't get any marks on the table, we didn't get any actual kills, then we're gonna very quickly lose this fight if we keep fighting. And so understanding that and being like, okay, we need to back up. We can't keep fighting. We need to back up. We need to disengage. We need to reset. We need to slow down, because you understand that if you keep going, you're gonna lose this fight, because the truth of the matter is you were kind of investing all of these cooldowns in order to get something, and it didn't pay off, and that means that there's something you should do about it. There's a decision to be made there after the fact, and it can change if you win, if you lose, if you reset, if you all just die and fall over. I know that this is a more advanced concept, and I'm going to be doing a new series on this channel where I'm going to break down actual gameplay and show you ways that you can make better decisions so that you can consistently outthink and outplay players in every rank. So smash that subscribe so you don't miss out on that series. The next unwritten rule is incredibly important, and it has to do with constantly changing positions. This is one of the most important concepts I can give you in this entire video. And it has to do with the fact that if you're in a certain position, a certain area, when a fight starts, you should never be there when the fight is ending, or like, 10 seconds, 12 seconds, 15 seconds into a fight. I think it's really important that you understand that when a fight starts, there are certain cooldowns, certain people alive, certain threats that are there that mean that you're playing in a certain position. And as certain threats die, certain people die, certain cooldowns are used, you can play more or less aggressive depending on the situation. It's incredibly important that you're always thinking, am I in the right position? Is there a better position that I can be in? And I know that thinking about this all the time is too much, but this is when I would say to think about it. When someone on your team dies, when someone on the enemy team dies, or when a massive ultimate is used, something that was really impactful, a powerful ult, a defensive ult, a super powerful offensive ult. When any of these things are used, I need you to reevaluate. Should I be pushed up here? Should I be pulled back here? Should I be resetting here? Should I be going somewhere else? What should I do? Where are the threats now? Is there a way that I can close in the gap? Is there a way that I can run it back? Because one of the things I see a lot in low elo is that I'll see these support players that, people will get 2 kills on their team, 3 kills, and the support players will be sitting back, sitting in the back line, just kind of sitting there spamming damage. And if you ask them, hey, why are you sitting here? They'll say, well, this is the position I'm supposed to play. I'm supposed to play in the back, right? I'm supposed to play safe so I don't die. But if you go look at a higher ranked support, what happens when there's 2 kills, 3 kills? Everyone, no matter who you are, is pushing forward and collapsing on the people that are left. This means if you're an Adam, you're W keying. This means if you're a Jeff, you're W keying. This means if you're a tank, you're W keying. Everyone is W keying and closing out the fight. And it's of course relative to your team's position. So you're not like W keying really hard if you're tanks and everyone's staying back. But if your team is pushing forward and closing out a fight and you don't change your position relative to your advantage, you could actually create situations where your team gets isolated, even though they were playing correctly, but you were staying in the same supposed positioning the whole time. But that's actually not optimal, because everything is different. When people die, when ultimates are used, when people die on either side, it changes what is the most optimal position. Another time I see this a lot is when players are holding on defense. They're holding a certain high ground or certain vantage point on defense, where they're like holding an objective, whether it's King of the Hill or in a situation where it's like first capture point, and they're holding a certain strong position. The enemy team come, they have a good fight, they win that fight, but in the process, they change their position somehow. They fell down to the low ground. They're playing too far forward or up when they closed out the fight. They pushed in, but now there's a downtime. There's a certain downtime now of like 10 to 20 seconds that no enemies are pushing, and you need to go and reposition back to the strong positions. But a lot of players will just stay where they were, and then the next fight they lose and they don't know why. It's because you had a good position before and you didn't retake that good position after you won the fight. The last example I'll give about this is especially when players are trying to like cap a certain checkpoint and everyone's sitting on point, but there's plenty of time for a Strange to TP on, and then someone comes out of the portal, everyone dies. The Strange gets 5 people out of the portal because you didn't position in the best possible place. If supports play off point, if DPS play off point, if only the tank is pushing it in, and the second people come through, they're being attacked from every angle, guess what? It's impossible for them to win. The only time they could possibly win is because players are grouped together, expecting no contention, and basically making a mistake. So think about the risk and the reward of certain positions as well, not just whether or not you're playing in a good place, because the risk there is that someone contests. The reward is maybe you cap before they get there, but I would err on the side of caution most of the time, because keep in mind, during a retake, enemies have a huge disadvantage, or they should, as long as you're positioned in good ways, because you already have the space, but you're giving up so much of it by just playing in one single spot. Now, number 4 is, why don't high elo players and low elo players care about the same heroes? Lately, there's been clip after clip of Black Panthers 2-tapping freaking supports and Spider-Man's flying around and killing people at Mach 10, and they're terrorizing games, but in higher elo, players just think that these are some of the weaker characters in the game and just don't care about them nearly as much, especially Black Panther. So why is there a huge disconnect here? Is it just reaction time or mechanics? I'm telling you, no, absolutely not. There's only one core difference between a high elo player and a low elo player when it comes to perceptions about these heroes, and it just has to do with adapting and potentially swapping. You see, the reality is there are some matchups that are extremely hard to beat on certain characters. Like if you're playing, let's say, an isolated Mantis, for example, and you have no one on your team that is peeling for you, Black Panther, when they reach a certain level of skill, will kill you consistently a lot. They will consistently kill you over and over and over again. But if you pop into any top rank lobby or relatively high rank lobby, it's only going to take a couple of deaths for that Mantis to swap, or players to swap around them, or some amount of change in playstyle or peel to happen. The Mantis could play very, very close to like their thing, for example, or play in a way that is extremely hard for the Black Panther to dive them. Basically, this is how you should think. If you want to consistently climb, you cannot allow yourself to be just denied or completely ineffective against a certain character. And one of the reasons why these characters in particular are basically written off, Black Panther is seen as a joke in high elo, is because you can just easily adapt him, swap your character, swap your play, and he becomes far worse, almost unplayable. But it's also why this character dominates so hard in the lower ranks, especially when players get to that threshold where they're good enough at the character and they haven't climbed higher, because players just don't adapt and don't counter him. So a Black Panther can kill, you know, that Mantis or Luna or whoever 5, 6, 7 times in a row before someone finally adapts, or that person will just simply not swap at all. This basically comes down to a couple things. You need to identify when you are being targeted and you are becoming a liability for your team. You need to see what is realistic about solving that problem. We can hope all day that we had better teammates that would peel for us, but that's not going to help you win this game. But swapping to a character that is undivable, or trying to change up your playstyle and try to experiment a couple of times will. And I will say that just swapping isn't always the best solution. You don't want to always run away from the characters that you like to play and swap to something that might be slightly more favored in the matchup. Sometimes it just has to do with adaptation, trying to play better, and most importantly, trying to put yourself in the shoes of the person that is targeting you. What are their pain points? How can you stop them? This is why if there's any character that you're really like very frustrated with, you hate the character, let's say you play support or DPS or tank or whatever, and there's a certain character that you just cannot stand and they always ruin your games, I actually recommend you run that character quite a bit, just a couple of matches, you know, every once in a while in quick play or on an ult account, because you very quickly learn that character isn't actually as scary as it seems when you're on the other end, and you can very easily figure out those pain points and learn how to better adapt how you play against them. Now, the next thing that's super important if you want to get consistent value is by getting consistent ultimates, or having the best ultimate possible. And a lot of players ask me, how do you get guaranteed value with Bucky ult? How do you make sure that your Magneto ult works? How do you make sure that your Emma ult gets value? What can you do to make it so that these ultimates actually do something, rather than you just, you know, hit no one with your freaking Bucky ult and die, get nobody under your mind control with Emma and die, or, you know, just end the game, throw your Magneto ult into the sky? What can you do to make your ults better? We can't expect every ult to be amazing, but what can we do to make them better on average? Now, the first thing that you could do is have a reasonable idea what ultimates your opponents have, especially the defensive ultimates. You basically can assume that after a fight has been fought for, you know, 30 seconds, they're gonna have it or less. And if a fight has went by and no one has used it, they definitely have it. Defensive ults get built very quickly, so you can assume that unless you've seen it go out, they actively have it. And this really matters because it changes the way you play, right? If I'm going to go in as Bucky and they pop a Luna ultimate, I might not get a reset and then, you know, be in the middle of the enemy team where I can't kill anybody and die. But that does mean that I can still make a play, right? I could try to hook someone out of position, 180, pin them behind and put them into my team, and then ult them. There might be a Luna Snow ult in response, but guess what? I got that first kill. I baited out an ult. That's a pretty good trade. And understanding that there are ways to play even into ultimates, or you play to bait them and then ult after the fact. There's also certain cooldowns that can completely shut down an ultimate play. It could be Soul Bond. It could be Totem. A lot of really powerful defensive cooldowns. Also cooldowns like Cloak and Dagger Fade, Magneto Bubble. There's a million of these cooldowns that can completely deny a play that you're making with your ultimate. And knowing that I'm not going to go in with Psylocke ult until I know that they've taken some damage, they've exhausted some of these powerful cooldowns, then I'm going to go in and pop it because I want a higher consistency in getting value. I know that I could just randomly pop it and pray and hope, but the more cooldowns I successfully bait out, the more reliable my ultimates will be, and that's going to build into that consistency that we talked about. Now, one of the things I think is also super important is go for a low-risk, guaranteed reward. I think really what it comes down to with a lot of these ultimates is not trying to go for the Hail Mary, the all-in amazing ultimate, right? We're going for more middle-of-the-pack ultimates that are a lot easier to get and get that value. So what I mean by that is, instead of going for the Bucky ult that might kill 6 people, we're going for the Bucky ult that will guarantee kill 1, right? We're going for that first person, that Namor that just popped out of his bubble, that support that has no defensive ultimate, or that person that is isolated, that's already low. Or if we're using a Psylocke ultimate, we're trying to kill 1 person with the ultimate, or maybe 2. We're not trying to ult in the middle of the enemy team and kill everybody. You gotta understand that the more you go for, the bigger of an ultimate you go for, oftentimes, the less likely it will get anyone at all. Like, I don't want to see sometimes you kill 3 people and most of the time you kill 0. I want to see consistent 1s and 2s. Bring down the ceiling that you're going for and create more consistency in the types of ultimate plays you're going for as well. Now, last up, I think this is really important, set up with your teammates. There are a lot of ultimates that combo so freaking well together. Scarlet Witch combines really well with abilities like Magneto Bubble, can combine really well with other abilities like Strange Teleport, or Emma's ultimate. You just combine them 1-in-1. Using a Groot ult with pretty much anything, whether it's Namor Well, whether it's Bucky ult, whether it's freaking Moon Knight ult. There's a lot of these ultimates that when you pair them together, they can overcome defensive ults or they can get you guaranteed high value. And really, the thing that you need to understand is that when you double down on the same play, it becomes way more likely to succeed than going for a ton of these isolated plays where you use one ultimate, gets no value. Your team uses an ultimate, gets no value. Someone else uses an ability, gets no value. But if you pair them all together, you'll wipe the whole team. And you can't always do this with randoms, but you have a duo partner that you're talking to in Discord or whatever the case may be. Set up combos. Play characters that combo. Work to do it more. If you can just have an ultimate combo that will just win you a fight. Okay, we won this fight, we get to move here. We won this fight, we get to move up. This is so important to build not only consistency in your ultimates, but just in your wins and losses, because some teams will just fold to that level of consistency. Now I'm going to give you one unwritten rule for tank, DPS, and support as our last 3 unwritten rules. First off, with tanking, I think a lot of tank players need to recognize what their role is in a composition, because you play very differently depending on what factors are a part of your comp. So let's say you're a Magneto, for example. In a situation where you're playing Magneto with Groot, Magneto with Strange, or with some other frontline space-creating tank, you can play pretty aggressive with Magneto. You can play an off angle, you can clear out the high ground, you could push up and take a really, really wide off angle to deal damage, or you can play very hyper peely where you're trying to bubble your team, CC the enemy team or the enemy divers, and protect them. And that's a playstyle that you would only do, by the way, if opponents were actively diving your team and your team needed help with it. So this gives you a lot of flexibility with the way that you play this character that is normally a poke tank. You have tons of flexibility built in there. However, in a world where you're solo tanking, a lot of these responsibilities just cannot be you. You can't be constantly in your back line peeling or sitting around and peeling. You cannot constantly be going back and helping your team every single second, and you can't be taking these super wide offensive off angles that might get you killed. Living is your most important priority, and being alive to contest objectives, be a resource that your supports can heal up to generate their ultimates, and just generally be the one that anchors your composition becomes incredibly important. And if you walk out of spawn thinking that you're going to play the same way every time on a tank, you're just wrong. Because let's think about Thor, for example. His playstyle changes dramatically depending on what your opponents are, depending on what you have on your team. It changes so much. Like, there's a good amount of the time where, let's say you're playing with another frontline tank, you can play to force a brawl. You can play to boop the enemy Magneto back into your team. You can boop the Strange back into your team, catch them out of position, boop the Groot even out of position, and you're just playing to bully the tanks over and over and over again. And this could be an effective strategy. But there are other times where you're trying to mark a diver. There's an Iron Fist, there's a Magic. You're marking these characters, you're chasing them around, you're never allowing them to set up or engage your team. There's other situations where you're playing with more mobility heavy characters and you're pivoting in and you're going in on a dive and you're helping your team confirm dive kills. So understand that this all changes depending on what your team has, what your team needs, and what the enemy team is doing as well. Because sometimes you don't need to mark anything. There's nothing diving your backline. Sometimes you actually can jump their backline and it's super easy to do, so you're going to do that more. But if they're playing hard CC, they're playing Namor, they're playing Bucky, they're playing Emma, you jump into their backline, you could just die. So you have to play way safer and more fundamental to try to create advantages on the front line. The more you learn about your character, you study your character, and you think about how your character should change in this situation, the better you'll be at identifying what your role is in any given game. Now, for DPS players, you need to look to create plays with specifically unfair engagements. I think a lot of times DPS players want to walk out, constantly go for whatever kill they see in front of them, go for a play all the time. But as a DPS player, you almost need to be a watcher. You're taking an off angle or whatever angle you want to, still outputting damage and being effective, but you're not going to really go for a play that puts you at risk until you see an opponent make a mistake or be in a position that is a catalyst for you. So what do I mean by that? You see someone slightly away from cover or out of position. You see someone low HP. You see someone isolated. These are all potential catalysts. Other catalysts could be they wasted a cooldown, or your teammates even jump on top of them and they help you with the engage. So basically what you're looking for is a green light, something that gives you a little bit of an advantage, because the trick is DPS players aren't just bodying everyone in 50-50 matchups. The best DPS players are looking for a favorable exchange where you can be a worse player, a worse engager, a worse aimer, and you're still winning the fight because the odds are stacked in your favor. You get to decide when to make an aggressive play. So just making it randomly versus finding these core moments to make them is going to dramatically change how successful they are. Now, the 8th big unwritten rule about support is that you sometimes need to let your team die. But wait, hear me out on this. I think as support players, you are under the most amount of decisions and pressure at any given moment. While all the other roles get to mostly be proactive, supports have to be reactive. And when you're reactive, you're kind of given a lot of different complex, problems to solve. You have a Spider-Man that's low, that's above you, an Iron Man that's off angling that needs to be healed, a tank that if you don't pocket non-stop, they will fall over, and there's someone actively coming for you as well. And this creates a lot of problems where sometimes it's hard to figure out what you should even do. What am I supposed to do? I have 4 things I need to do, and I can't do them all. And the thing that you need to understand is that sometimes you need to let certain things go. And what I mean by that is you cannot control everything, but if you try to handle everything, you'll just crash and burn. If you try to sometimes give the Iron Man a little heals and the Spider-Man a little heals and the Groot a little heals and then you die. I've reviewed a lot of supports that have not actively fought someone that's after them because they're doing another job, or someone was so out of position and they just constantly tried to keep them up, and that person died and then everyone else died that could have been saved. And so sometimes you need to think about not only what your team needs, but who is actually someone that you can impact and help. And most importantly, what is that cost? Because there's a massive opportunity cost that comes with trying to save everybody and trying to do everything. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't try to raise your reaction time and try to have high APM actions per minute and do all these things, but there are moments in time where even a high-ranked support player will decide, okay, I'm not going to heal this moment, and I'm going to actively try to sleep this diver that's on me. I'm going to try to kill them. I'm going to get them off me, and then I'm going to go back to doing my job. And if people die in the process, well, they die in the process. I did what I needed to do, and then I'm moving on to the next thing. Think of it almost like a checklist that you go in order, not necessarily something that you have to do all at once. I really think that support players that can compartmentalize, that handle one objective at a time and do it well, instead of trying to juggle everything all at once, especially when it gets too much, actually become more effective because they get rid of one problem and move on to the next, get rid of that problem and move on to the next, and they just become a lot more efficient and better at doing the job that they're trying to do, and it allows them to speed through that job quicker. Like if you're Luna and you are trying to rush a heal on like an Iron Man that needs it, and then you miss once, and then you miss twice, you miss 3 times, and then you finally hit him and you're like, oh, I got some healing out, and then you leave and move on to something else. You only did that because you were under so much pressure that it actually created your own mistake. And I know what you're saying. You're saying, hey, if I don't do all these things perfectly, I'm gonna get flamed, I'm gonna get roasted. And the reality of it is, and this is kind of the frustrating part, but it's true, you playing correctly doesn't necessarily mean that your tanks and DPS are gonna like it, right? Like a great support doesn't coddle their DPS or tanks. They don't instantly heal them up when they have the slightest bit of damage. They don't instantly attend to your needs the moment you take damage. And in fact, doing that can basically create games where these players expect it and then they start inting and making plays they wouldn't make because they expect the pocket. It's about giving them what they need or what you can give them with your resource, with your time, with the other things you need to do, and that's it. And sometimes there's gonna be moments where you just can't give them what they need, and they're just gonna have to deal because your priorities are extremely important as well, and it's not in your best interest to always bend the knee and try to help everybody and then help nobody, because you just kind of do a little bit of so many things, you get overwhelmed, and then nothing goes right. But if you have any questions about any of these unwritten rules, definitely let me know in the comments down below. Smash that like, subscribe, and let me know what guides you want to see very quickly on this channel. We're pumping out guides right now, so let me know. Thank you so much for coming by. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.